it's time now to move on to our next session, examining exactly what these new quarantine rules that we've just been discussing will mean for the UK travel industry. And it's particularly timely, of course, because this was discussed yesterday in the House of Commons. We now know that we are having these quarantine rules. There's nothing that's going to happen in the next few weeks. We've got June 28th is the date that we may see a change in this. But of course, that's 3 weeks of more uncertainty for the travel industry. And still no confirmation yet of air bridges being established, and no firm deadline as to when these quarantine measures will actually be removed. So the UK travel industry remains deeply, of course, concerned about the impact of the quarantine rules on the sector. Here to discuss that is our next panel. So welcome to all of you. I'm joined here today by Karen Dee, Chief Executive of the Airport Operators Association, Colin Stewart, who's joining us here in both of his capacity as Country Director UK and Ireland for Air Europa, and of course as Chair of LATA, that's the Latin America Travel Association, and of course by Luke Petherbridge, Head of Public Affairs at ABTA. Now our discussion is particularly timely as we learned on Wednesday that the government isn't going to be amending any of its quarantine rules, but will first be reviewing it, I think, on June 28th. I think that's correct. Karen, it's quite timely because you last joined us a month ago, and I distinctly remember us having a conversation there where you stressed how much you'd explained to ministers about how ludicrously unhelpful quarantine measures would be, and it seemed to be that they listened, and then I think it was a day later or 2 days later, it suddenly came out that this is what was happening. Presumably, did that take you totally by surprise? Have you been kind of in constant dialogue with government since to try and get this amended?
I think constant dialogue is an interesting phrase to use. Certainly, I mean, we're hugely disappointed by the proposals as they stand. It's clear that government feels or has been advised that, that it's got to take active measures to avoid a second wave. None of us would argue with that. I think where we have real problems is with this kind of blanket approach that they're going with. So, since the first announcement up until today, when or yesterday, I should say, when the legislation was laid, what we've been trying to do is to understand from government what's going to be the criteria for the review, and how are they going to measure the impact? What else are they going to do to help support the industry? Because I think, what we're keen to do is move towards a more risk-based approach, and that's what we're seeing in other countries. So, hugely frustrating for us, but, we're going to have to work with what we've got and continue to try and make sure ministers understand that, there are better ways of doing this and achieving the same ends. So something which continue to provide the public with kind of reassurances that they need about safe travel, whilst also minimising the impacts on our, not just on the aviation sector and hospitality and tourism, but all of those other wider sectors that rely on the kind of services that aviation provides.
I mean, there's a lot of MPs that have been highly critical of this measure. I think it's fair to say, that there is only seems to be a minority that actually want this measure to go through. Obviously, some are accusing the ministers of being perhaps a PR stunt. I think what a lot of people are struggling to understand is what is going to change on Monday that isn't relevant now. You could fly in and out and fine, the FCO advice hasn't changed, but in theory you could fly in and out today and not be quarantined, and yet on Monday you will face a quarantine. Luke, do you get any sense that perhaps this might suggest that the FCO advice is going to be changing and that's why they're doing it, or is that just too optimistic?
Well, it's interesting to say that. Of course, ABTA's position, whilst we've always said that public health clearly has to take priority at this time, has been that we need from the government a strategic approach to restarting international travel. And that needs to encompass all of the different elements now. So yes, absolutely, how do we exit the quarantining measures? What are the criteria, as Karen said, to deliver the end to the quarantining measures, but also, what is their approach to FCO travel advice, which the non-essential travel advice has now been in place for 11 weeks. We are looking at some uncertainty as to when that will be lifted. We think what we need is a comprehensive plan from government that includes every element, including, of course, recovery measures as well. How are they going to support the sector through the next stage of the COVID recovery as well? So we'd like to see a proper strategic approach taken by government and outlined to all of the industry sectors that Karen reflected.
And it's exactly that point, that lack of a plan that is, the whole industry is floundering, because how can they look ahead and think? I mean, Colin, obviously, with both your hats on, but certainly with the airline hat on, for Air Europa, that you must just be incredibly frustrated, because how can you get operations moving again when you don't know when you can?
Spot on, and I think that predictability is really key for an airline and for any business operating in this industry. And so as an airline, you have to make a decision, you have to plan. You know, when the crisis happened, it was literally switched off. The demand was switched off overnight, and that was fairly easy to kind of implement, i.e. the aircraft are grounded. But to get the ball rolling again, to get the industry up and running, that doesn't just happen overnight. It's impossible for it just to be switched back on. So there's lots of planning, there's lots of coordination required, there's lots of stakeholders involved to make it work and to be so that we're ready to go live when we need to. So we're having to, in some cases, make educated guesses on when is the best time for us as an airline to start. We operate into a number of international markets, and I think the message that we're getting is that, or that we certainly feel, is that there is no kind of coordinated approach to this. And so we know ICAO are doing a great job in trying to create this kind of universal implementation of global standards, which works. We know it works. It's worked in the past to create a safe aviation industry. So why wouldn't it work in this crisis to have some sort of agreement in terms of these standards? And so for me, you're absolutely right. It's a challenge to predict as and when we start operating, but we have to make a commercial decision on that, aligned to making sure that we mitigate the risks associated with this virus.
I mean, let's be blunt. How devastating are these quarantine proposals for the travel industry? Karen, I mean, talk to us from the airport side. How devastating are they for the sector?
Well, we think that they're really devastating, because what they are at the moment, let's not forget, is a blanket approach. So a blanket requirement, whether you're a UK resident or not, anyone arriving back in the UK has to self-isolate for 14 days. Okay, so who is going to go on a 2-week holiday if they have to spend that 2 weeks in the UK in their hotel room or whatever accommodation? And on the flip side, which holidaymaker from the UK is going to go on holiday and then, self-isolate for 2 weeks when they come back? So, it's that open-ended kind of approach that's not based on differential risk. That's the real problem. And I think without any kind of certainty, or the government has said that there'll be a review in 3 weeks, but it hasn't said it will be lifted, and it hasn't said what the criteria for the review will be. So, it's very difficult for, Collins to plan, our members to plan, and for passengers to plan, because, it just creates that uncertainty. Whereas actually, if they were able to say, right, we're going to take a risk-based approach, we're going to open air bridges where it makes sense with countries that have frankly, lower risk than the UK at the moment, we're going to apply these international health standards that we've been working on with government. That gives the industry a bit more certainty about how to plan, so that we can bring forward some of those, the offers that we might want to make to people, and also gives consumers a bit more certainty about when they might feel more confident to be able to say, okay, it looks much more likely that I will be able to travel in a sensible way, in a safe way, and therefore I'm going to book. So it's just that, the level of uncertainty that applies to this approach that we're concerned with.
And Luke, would you agree with the use of that word devastating? Are these measures devastating for the UK travel industry?
Of course. I mean, they're going to have a very significant dampening impact on appetite to travel, as Karen said, both inbound and outbound. And we've always been very clear with the government in all of our messaging around this that, yes, of course, public health has to take priority, but there is no avoiding that this is going to have a devastating impact on the aviation, tourism and travel sectors. And that's why we've been saying there needs to be a coordinated plan to support the entire industry through this process. And I think the government, the positive aspect of today was that it was some hint from Priti Patel that they are starting to look at a coordinated approach between the different departments to support travel. Well, they need to get on with that, frankly, as quickly as possible now, because we've waited 11 weeks. to have that kind of coordinated restarting travel and travel support package, and it needs to be delivered.
Karen, you talked about this self-isolation part. I mean, this in itself just seems to be a bit of a mockery. As I understand it, you can arrive back from your holiday, get on public transport, travel into London, then get your train back to your home and still go shopping once a week or whatever. So this kind of quarantine is not necessarily you go home and you don't leave your home for the next week. It just seems a bizarre method that they're applying.
Yeah, well, and I think there's some ambiguity about that. But certainly the strong advice is that if you are self-isolating, you are self-isolating. So you shouldn't be going out shopping unless you're starving and you can't get food any other way. So, but clearly you're right. There is a question mark about how enforceable it will be and what kind of checks and balances. I think the indication is that it's going to be reliant on spot checks, which is perfectly reasonable approach. But it's certainly not going to be a system which implies 100% checks and 100% compliance, because the system isn't set up for that. So again, that's why we think something which is based more around gearing towards the risk, putting in place the kind of health measures that the industry's been working on, both in the UK and globally, as Colin mentioned, that we think is a better approach to managing that risk and creating, reassuring passengers that we've got that safe journey, rather than a sort of, blunt, what we think is a blunt instrument, frankly.
Yeah. Colin, with your sort of LARTA hat on, there must be a certain degree of incredulity from LARTA members who are looking at the UK, which has the second highest death rate in the world, highest in Europe, and yet we almost have the audacity to say to people coming into our country, actually, you need to quarantine. It's more, will other countries accept us? I mean, what are other countries doing? What can we learn from what other countries are doing? Why is the UK doing this blanket quarantine measure?
I guess I can't answer on behalf of the government why they've made that decision. I think that there's certainly a lot of confusion out there amongst our members. A lot of desire for information and for data and for clarity on what's happening in the UK. The UK is a key market for many of our Latin American members and countries, and so they want to see that demand return quickly. It's a very complex situation in the sense that we're not talking about this idea of switching on and off. The reality is the global travel industry will come back in different times and at different paces. Certain countries are ready now to welcome in tourists. Others are nowhere near ready. And so, for Latin America, we are constantly engaging with the governments and the tourist boards to understand at what stage of their recovery are they at. And I think what we will see is an unlocking of borders and a phased approach depending on when each country is ready to come back. And so as an airline, switching hats, we're not able to kind of come back at 100% capacity pre-COVID and say, look, this is what we're going to, 23 destinations into Latin America. It might be that we have to start in a very gradual process. We certainly don't see the airline operating anywhere near the capacity that we did pre-March, end of March. And I think that's something that all airlines are having to look at. You talked earlier about how devastating this is, or that has been. The quarantine will be. Airlines are, it's a really, and we don't expect sympathy, but on our knees, right? They as an Air Europa, we are 95% of our fleet is grounded. And so if you think about, overnight, our income dried up. And so we are eager to start operating again and to start get that engine moving again in terms of the tourism. And so there's a lot of clarity required. I think that it has been devastating. I think that what Karen and Luca have mentioned is that we, as an industry that wasn't always unified over the last few months, this is one aspect where we are unified and where we are together. And I think that voice needs to be heard. And I think the government have heard it. And I think that the next 3 weeks, I think I have to break it into two areas. There's the next 3 weeks, we can't do anything about that. And actually, I think demand for travel will be low anyway. And then it's what happens after that is going to be key. So our voice, our unified voice as an industry, has never been more important than now.
Yeah, I mean, you say that the next 3 weeks in terms of demand for travel, it might be that people don't want to travel the next 3 weeks, but what will these quarantine measures mean for people that would have booked otherwise? You know, if people see quarantine measures, will it put people off booking? Luke, I don't know if that's something that ABTA members are concerned of, or do you think people are actually still hopeful of a summer season?
Well, I think there will be some concern around the immediate impact on bookings, of course, and of course the knock-on impact for bookings that are already in place. But for the summer season, yeah, we are hopeful. I mean, we are, picking up on what Colin said, we are working together as an industry. We've joined the Future of Aviation Group, which was set up by Karen D and the AOA. And you know, we are trying to build parliamentary support for a planned and strategic exit for the travel industry to restart international travel. And I think we need to focus on that. It is going to be here for the next 3 weeks. We now need to focus on building that case for, as Karen said, what is the criteria to review this? Do we understand the measures that the government is using to look at quarantining and whether it's appropriate to keep it in place? Do we understand the measures that they're assessing air bridges or travel corridors against? And that's what we really need now, is clarity from the government on how all of this is going to work and how we can kick on and restart travel later in the summer.
And this air bridges point is really important because it was suggested by the Priti Patel is certainly open to it, isn't it? And I know that the number of destinations have expressed interest. I think Greece, Portugal are among, I think possibly Spain, possibly France, have expressed interest in this. Are you quite hopeful, Karen, that the air bridges could be a reality in quite soon, or is it something further down in the summer?
No, well, certainly I'm optimistic, and I was really pleased to see that both the Transport Secretary and the Home Secretary have are now talking in a positive way about the prospect of these air bridges. And these are not a unique UK concept. They are, I believe, in operation between other countries. So New Zealand and Australia, for example, have got them. So, and the concept is a very simple one, which is, can you create the circumstances between two countries, if you like, that says, okay, well, we're confident that we can manage the risk, or either both a low risk or that we've got the measures in place at both ends, where we feel it's safe for our citizens to travel. So, the concept is a really good one. I think what we're keen to, really help government achieve is put those into practice. Ideally, we'd like all countries to be open. We're the UK is a great aviation market, third biggest in the world, and we want to continue to do that. We are leaders in this. So, the more that we can help government press that and make that progress with those others and open up the market in a safe way, the better for all of us and better for the economy.
Yeah, and Colin, this air bridge idea then could be crucial for you as well, for Air Europa, if we could get this linked to Spain.
Yeah, it is. I think I would just add to Karen in the sense that if the government are looking at this approach, and we would be supportive of that, absolutely, that it can't just be a cherry-picking exercise as well. I think the idea of opening up one market like Spain, which would be great, and it's fantastic, but this has to be much wider field than just one or two destinations. The government have got 3 weeks now to really get their heads around what needs to happen. But from an airline's perspective, Air Europa, we fly Europe, we fly all through Latin America, the Caribbean, North America. So, opening up Spain is great. It's a whole market, but it's one market for us. And so we really need for it to really kind of come together. The government needs to be looking beyond just one or two air bridges. This needs to be a kind of global approach.
Yeah. And what happens next? After the quarantine measures are finally lifted, what will aviation, the sector that travelling on a plane look like, travelling through an airport look like? I mean, we saw Istanbul airport released quite an interesting video, I think yesterday or the day before, and they talked about PPE vending machines and mandatory masks for everybody, which I know is something that Manchester Airport Group has already implemented. Karen, do you see something that this now being a new measure across all airports in the UK? Everybody will be wearing masks. There'll be PPE equipment. I know we talked about it before, and it's a month on now. Do you think that's it now? That's the future of air travel?
Certainly, yeah, absolutely. The air travel, the airport, the journey through from a passenger perspective is going to be quite different, I think, going forward. And these sorts of discussions have been held by ICAO and others, and also in the UK. So we know, for example, that as we're seeing on other modes of transport and other areas of the economy, that, you know, it may be that we're recommending masks for passengers. There may be, because, and this is because you can't have social distancing at every point of the journey. So clearly, where you can, and that's even in a large airport, that's still fairly limited. So if you can't have those, what are the other things? So, you know, enhanced sanitizing and cleaning regimes. You know, some airports are trialing tests, temperature testing. You know, but what we are saying to government is that we need the medical advice to support that, so that we can say what's the combination of measures through the airport onto the aircraft that actually provides that kind of security. So mask is one, and what are the other things? But my view is that absolutely those things are going to be common, you know, not just in the UK airport, but across airports around the world. And that's the way the industry is going.
If you're still waiting for that advice, though, when will we see those changes implemented? If you're still waiting to hear from the scientists on what is needed?
Well, I think a lot of work has been done. So we have seen advice in the European level. We're now, you know, waiting for UK government just to check it's happy with those. There's been a lot of work amongst industry and government to bring those things forward. And that's why you are seeing already some airlines, some airports beginning to implement some of those things. I think you know, like the masks, for example, I think it's fairly certain that given where we are on public transport, it looks likely that we will be encouraging those sorts of things. So we're at the moment, the reason why you're not seeing lots of it is, of course, that there are very few flights at the moment. So, you know, most of the airports are pretty quiet at the moment, but actually as part of the restart, that's what we want to have in place, so that when the passengers do hopefully come back in droves, then we'll be ready, and they'll be informed of the sorts of things that they can expect.
And Colin, talk to us about what Air Europa is doing to plan for when the travel does finally start coming back.
Yeah, so as an airline, we're looking at starting operations again 22nd of June, domestic Spain, and then from Europe and long haul from the 1st of July. 15th of July, sorry. So from the 15th of July, we'll start operating from Gatwick again. We've implemented the IGAO guidelines. So we are, you know, following their kind of guidelines, which you talked earlier about, you know, where is the kind of scientific health kind of suggestions and guidelines? Well, it's there. And so we are implementing more regular disinfection of the plane, more regular cleans of the aircraft. We've got the facilities on board for disinfecting wipes. All of the crew wear masks and gloves. We're also
full PPE equipment, or
so I wouldn't say full PPE. I think mask, gloves at the moment. That's what we're currently. In fact, we've had that equipment on board since May 2000, and I think it was 3. It's always been there, but now we're actually making it mandatory to wear. And also the beginning of May, we also introduced a mandatory for passengers to wear the masks as well. On top of that, we are trying to remove as many touch points as possible. So newspapers, things like that are kind of being removed. We're providing food in special kind of picnic bags, so everything's contained in there. Individual bottles of water, so that there's no, you know, cups being shared and refilled. And so anywhere and everywhere where we can kind of reduce those touch points, we're doing that. We're introducing screens at the check-in in our main hub in Madrid and in some Spanish airports. And so really everything that we're trying to do is to mitigate the risk of transmission. And I think that's what we're all talking about here. There's no 100% solution to this, but we're doing everything that's been advised to mitigate that risk and to restore confidence in flying. And I think, just to add, I think that's probably the main concern that we've come across, is about, is it safe to fly? And when I do fly, what are you doing to make sure that I'm comfortable and I'm safe and I've got the confidence to do that? And so as an industry, that's really the focus. If you see from all airlines at the moment, it's about, this is what we're doing to mitigate that risk. Just to add to that, finally, I think no matter what the situation regarding the quarantine, and I think we've hammered that home quite clearly, until the FCO changed that ruling, everything else is by the by. You know, because we talked about the insurance issue around the travellers' insurance. Is that covered if the FCO are saying don't fly? You talk about major organisations and companies. their policies are, my staff don't travel. If the SCO are saying it's only essential travel, the policy is don't fly. So it's very difficult. We're ready to go. The industry is ready to go, but the government really need to get on board and allow us to do that in a safe way.
Yeah, and on this FCO topic, actually, that brings us full circle. I mean, the title of today's seminar is "Can Summer Be Saved?" And Luke, you said that you are in dialogue with government about the FCO advice. Is there any sense from ministers about when that might be lifted? Can summer be saved? I mean, you said you're optimistic that Brits will be going on holiday, perhaps. Is it July, August? Is it just August? How hopeful are you?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly one of the others earlier mentioned that the tone of government has certainly changed. If you look at the comments that were being made by Matt Hancock and the Transport Secretary a couple of weeks back, they were not optimistic, and now they are at pains to stress that, you know, they are trying to enable people to take summer holidays. The Aviation Minister was very clear on that today in Parliament, as was the Home Secretary and the Transport Secretary. So clearly there is a movement to try and move back to a more ordinary state of affairs with FCO travel advice, so country by country advice, rather than the blanket non-essential advice that is in place at the moment. We don't have a clear timeline on that, but we are aware that there are discussions taking place within the FCO about how we can transition back to the more standard approach that they would usually be taking. So I think I do remain optimistic that we will be able to save the summer. And then the important bit is has been reflected on by the other speakers today, really, is that the principles are going to be the same regardless of which point of the consumer journey you're on. You're going to need to communicate very clearly with customers so they know what to expect throughout the journey, and they're not taken by surprise at any element of, you know, how travel has changed. And then it's about mitigation of risk and mitigating the risk of transmission, whatever part of the consumer journey you're on, whether that be at the airport, on the plane, or indeed at resort. And, you know, ABTA has guidance for members on the destination side as well around you know, social distancing and mitigation of risk in resort.
Anybody wanting to try and affect change that's watching today, presumably your advice would be to write to your MP and to just write to as many people as possible. I'm guessing, is that your key advice?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, you know, clearly, as you will have seen from the debates in Parliament, you know, there is a strength of feeling, there is certainly a concern, and I think, you know, not just about the impacts on the aviation industry, but all, you know, those sectors that we support. And so I think that there is that recognition from politicians of the impact that this is going to have, and I think that is very welcome. So the more that people can express those concerns and, you know, make sure that you know, politicians continue to understand the impacts that this is having, you know, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much to the three of you. We are going to move to the live Q&A. I'm conscious of time. I know that there's a lot of questions about this topic, so thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks again. And just while our panelists join us for the live Q&A, we are going to be doing another poll. Just to flag, Karen sadly can't join us today, so is going to be replaced by Christopher Snelling, Director of Policy for the AOA. And just while they join us, so our next poll is: how devastating do you believe the quarantine measures will be for the UK travel industry? Very, I can see already everyone's voting on very. If they remain in place, they could ultimately lead to thousands of job losses. Do you think they're necessary for the safety of the British public? Or do you think perhaps they've just been hyped up by the travel sector? Not getting any votes for that last point at the moment, I see. Yeah, please keep voting. We will we'll make those poll results live as soon as I can see everyone has stopped voting. Welcome, Christopher. Hi, Colin. And I think Luke is just joining us. Hi. I presume all of you three would vote for number one, that you believe these are very devastating for the, I mean, Luke, you said that quite emphatically in the panel discussion. Just to move to the first question, we've had a question from Stuart Pinnell. And he says, his concern is that the quarantine impact on the airline industry will lead to severe financial difficulties for the airline. He says that he's a winter operator and he's dependent on companies such as EasyJet, BA, Swiss, maintaining their schedules. What is the likelihood of airlines going out of business? I guess as a result of COVID-19, but also particularly because of these quarantine measures. Colin, you know, you're obviously in the airline industry yourself. So what are your thoughts on this? Could we see failures?
It's a lovely, welcoming, warm question to start with. Thanks for that. Listen, the reality is, you mentioned it, how devastating the COVID crisis has been, and I think it's clear that every single company, organisation, no matter what element of the industry you're involved in, will be taking a big hit at the moment. Where the reality is, a commercial balance between your income drying up and your costs remaining, there's going to be an impact of that. So I think that a lot of airlines will certainly be squeezed, and will have to really look at their liquidity, their credit limits in terms of what financial support they've got in place to get them through this period. But those airlines that are well structured, that have been run successfully and run well, I think will be fine and will make it through this period and come out stronger at the other end. But with anything as significant as this, and it is unprecedented, there will always be those that don't make it. And so, I think everybody is hoping and praying for a quick return to a form of normality. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, Christopher, of course, it's not just airlines, is it? It's airports that are going to be affected by this, particularly the smaller regional ones. Might we see the closure of some smaller airports?
Yeah, and I think that's particularly where you get a problem, because obviously the airport is the gateway. And so if airport loses sufficient business that it then shuts, it means even if there were some flights that could have kept going, they're then denied that possibility. Not to mention, from our point of view, other operations like freight that are perfectly viable commercially. But if the airport itself isn't viable, the airport shuts, we lose everything. And the other point is that these things would take time to get back up and running. If they do shut down, if you see bankruptcies, it would take a long time to get these airports back in business, even though they continue to exist as a piece of infrastructure. So that could really add to the negative effects, medium and long term, on the aviation industry and everything else that depends upon it.
Easy to close, but not so easy to open back up.
Yeah.
That ties in with our poll. I'm just going to share the results now. So we've had overwhelming 185, so it's 83% of you said that you believe these are very devastating. Interestingly, 17% said some of you believe that they are necessary for the safety of the public, but nobody believes these fears have been hyped up the travel sector. Here's hoping the government is listening to the industry's cries at the moment. Luke, we have a question here just about the countries that are being considered for air bridges. This person clearly has an interest in Turkey. They're saying, is Turkey one of them? We've obviously had Portugal expressing an interest. I think I've seen Spain, France. Is that right? Have you got any indication of which destinations might be being looked at? Is the government talking to you about this?
The government hasn't told us which countries it's in conversations with. Certainly Portugal has gone public and said that it's having conversations with the Home Secretary. We know the FCO has said it's open to have those conversations, but they're not giving us any indication of which countries they're already talking to now.
Okay, so we kind of have to watch this space, and it indicates the lack of clarity again, or lack of any kind of guidance that we're getting from the government. We have a question here from somebody who's just, not really a question, more a statement, just pointing out, I guess, really the ridiculousness of these quarantine measures, and that they're saying that recently a passenger travelled through Birmingham Airport. They had excellent health sanitizers, etc., and everybody was put on one bus to the aircraft for their flight, where the aircraft cabin crew had no masks. So it kind of makes a mockery of it. But from what you were saying, Colin, certainly Air Europa has strict plans in place to make sure that health and safety is a priority on board as well as in the airport.
Absolutely, and it has to be a priority at the moment. And on that scenario you just raised there about the coaches and the buses that connect people from the aircraft to the terminals, I guess what we're doing is we're ensuring that where we can have social distancing in place, so we're increasing the frequency of the buses, but also limiting the number of people on the buses themselves to remove or certainly to restrict that risk. So yeah, every aspect of the journey, I think we mentioned it in the presentations, this can't just be what we do on board the aircraft. This is about how we get to the airports, what we do when we're going through the airports, what we do once we arrive in the airports. This has to be a completely all-encompassing approach. And I think that the guidelines are in place, i.e. ICAO have outlined how that can work. It's now about implementing those guidelines.
Yeah. We have a question here just about whether it says the Caribbean sector insisting on a COVID-19 test within 48 hours of travel, I don't know about that, as well as temperature checks on arrival. Is this not a feasible option for the UK instead of quarantine? So could we be doing testing at the airport perhaps, Christopher? Is that something that airports could look at? Is that a feasible option?
Well, I think it may well be part of it. I mean, I think one of the strange thing that's come out in discussion is they said if you arrive, you qualify for a test, you have a test, it's negative, therefore you don't have it, but you still have to quarantine for 14 days anyway, which is a bit weird. But I think the other problem with that, with the testing, is that it still has a lot of the same tourism effect, because are you going to travel knowing you're going to be tested at the other end, and if you fail the test, you're then in quarantine? That, in terms of confidence to travel, confidence to go on holiday, that could cause major problems. But it may be that's one of those that might be necessary from a public health point of view. It may still have very negative consequences, but equally, I think really we're looking more at the risk-based measures around everything, in terms of the risk from the country you're coming from and the risk involved on the method of transport, the health measures on the flight and in the airport. And if that's in place, then you should be good to go.
And of course, it could become the new norm. Perhaps having a COVID-19 test will become the new norm of travel that everybody will quickly get used to and adapt to, because I know there were measures brought into airports at first, with the security, the 100 ml of liquids. At first, everybody thought, oh God, that's going to be devastating for travel. But actually, everyone very used to it very quickly.
I think that's an important point about getting this right as quickly as possible, particularly with this crazy way that it's a blanket restriction at first, and then at some point they'll introduce the air bridges and they'll relax about certain countries. They need to do that quickly, because the other thing consumer confidence needs is to see it happening, to see it in place. If we've seen the news reports and we now know, oh yeah, you actually now can travel to Spain and it works, then people will have the confidence to go, people will have the confidence to book. But you need to see it working before the middle of July for that to really stand a chance of getting that summer happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Luke, we've got a question here. Someone saying, do air bridges need to be authorised by the EU? Do they?
No, it would be a bilateral basis. You couldn't exclude, as a European country, as easily other European countries because of the Schengen area, depending on what you're doing with your internal borders. But no, it will be a bilateral decision for the UK and those countries. I mean, if you look at the European approach at the moment, there are 11 member states that are investigating travel corridors in Europe. Clearly, that is not all 27 of the European countries. So I don't believe it's a case that the EU would be able to, kibosh approaches to do this.
What about Brexit? I've seen some rumours that perhaps it could be used as a negotiating tool in the Brexit talks. I don't know if you've heard any of those rumours or if that's all they are.
I haven't. I think there's clearly a correlation between COVID and Brexit, and one that could be a very unfortunate one for us if we end up in a period of uncertainty around what's happening with the EU-UK trade deal. Just as we're trying to recover from COVID, and that's part of our messaging to government that would be an unhelpful place to end up in. But I haven't heard anyone saying use it as a bargaining chip, and to be honest, I don't think that would be appropriate given this is a global public health pandemic.
Yeah. Colin, we have a question here just about social distancing and airline slots. So saying, will airline slots be affected by social distancing? As in, will there be a restriction of the number of flights landing per hour per day?
It's a great question. Just listening to Martin's presentation earlier around the queuing times and the impacts that will have on the operational side, to give you a quick answer, I'm not sure. I think initially the demand is going to be slow, and I think that as and when that demand picks up, and as and when we start to get back to the kind of levels of travel and as we saw pre-COVID, then obviously there might be an impact there. But from my understanding, I don't know if there would be a necessary impact on the slots of airlines arriving. I guess it depends on the airport capacity, how the flow of the passengers as they arrive and go through customs, etc. So I'm sure that's been considered. But I think in the short term, I think the airports will be the first to admit that there's plenty of capacity at the moment, and but hopefully we'll see a ramp up of demand very quickly.
But Christopher, it's a valid point for an airport like Heathrow, which during normal times does operate at pretty almost, I think it's 98% capacity or something. You know, it's not much room for social distancing, spacing necessarily. I don't know what your thoughts would be on this.
No, I think that's true. I think I'd agree with Colin's point that, you know, we're not, even if we get the quarantine targeting that we need, we get the air bridges, we get the FCO advice fixed, we're still not going to see a quick return to busy levels of air travel in the UK. But it is true that intrinsically, and most particularly on the aircraft themselves, you can't do social distancing, because if you were only going to quarter fill an aircraft, it isn't commercially viable, so it won't fly. So you have to accept that where you can't, as always in every situation, where you can't socially distance, you have to use health measures. And that's what's being worked out now, and that's what will be in place in the airports as well as on the airlines. And you know, it's the same sort of risk-based approach that we'd already take to issues like security. You know, you have to take a series of measures in order to minimize the risk of terrorism. And you know, it's that same approach to healthcare in this instance.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions about air bridges, of course, because everybody is wondering how on earth they're going to work and which destinations they're going to go to, which obviously points to the lack of clarity from government. But somebody says here, Danny Callahan says, is there any indication on how air bridges will work when a passenger may have originated from another country? For instance, if we have an air bridge with Portugal, what happens if a Spaniard drives to a Portuguese airport and flies in? Luke, is there any clarity on the air bridge, how it will work?
Well, I think that might be a question that's a better place for Christopher. But I guess, you know, the air bridge isn't based on nationality; it's based on the destination. So, you know, if you're flying legitimately out of a Portuguese airport into the UK, and we had an air bridge with Portugal, then that would be something you can do. In terms of whether or not you have the right to fly, I guess that comes down to the current UK rule, of course, is if you've landed in those countries within 14 days, then you would still be required to quarantine. How you check that, of course, within the European Union, this all comes down to the points that were being made yesterday around, you know, how enforceable all of this is going to be in practice. Because, you know, certainly if you're moving within the Schengen area, how you can check whether someone who's gone to Portugal, Spain, Italy, whatever it might be, is clearly far more difficult. But I don't know whether Chris has anything he wants to add on that.
Yeah, I think obviously you would, you know, technically be able to get round it that way. But again, you've got to ask yourself, you know, what is the likelihood that someone's going to be doing to that? I mean, how desperate would someone be to get to the UK that they would risk what would still be effectively breaking the rules that way, because you would be asked health questions as you come. And I don't think Spain's a good example, but there will be examples out there where you say, you know, high risk country X, you know, it'll say, you know, where have you been in the last 2 weeks? And if you say, oh, I've just come from this high risk country, then it isn't necessarily, you may still need to quarantine or you may not be allowed to travel. If you lie about that, obviously you're then running the risk that you could get found out, and you would really ruin your trip in a big way. So in human nature, are people likely to take that risk in order to try and come to the UK? It doesn't, again, if the approach is risk-based, then what is the degree of risk there? And I think it's pretty low.
Okay. We've got a question here about the suggestion by the WTTC to establish a COVID-free certificate. Do we think that this will give more confidence to the consumer? It's that weird thing, isn't it, where you could have a stamp on your passport to say you have had it, and obviously that means that perhaps you can travel then because you've got the antibodies. But then do we really want to separate people into those who have, those who haven't? I don't know what any of your thoughts are on this. Luke or Colin or...
Well, I wasn't too sure what how to interpret the question, to be honest. I mean, we know destinations are looking at kind of COVID safe kite marks and the like to show that they are following the right protocols in terms of risk mitigation. And I think certainly aspects like that can work. But in terms of certification
for individuals
to demonstrate either you've had COVID or, you know, that you don't have COVID. I mean, if you've had COVID, of course, the antibodies, the science around that doesn't appear to be proven yet, although I'm no medical expert. But you know, if you haven't had it, I'm not sure, certainly once you get outside of a couple of days time frame, how much value that would hold, to be honest, because, you know, you haven't got it doesn't mean you can't contract it at any
the
point.
next day or, yeah. Colin, anything to add on that point, or Chris?
I mean, I think, you know, with my latter hat on, I guess
we've worked hard at trying to kind of create a stamp of approval regarding health and safety resorts in Latin America, so that there are ways of identifying which resorts are meeting a certain standard of service and safety to our customers and to those traveling. I think this is a bit more complex for the points that Luke's kind of mentioned there, and I think also to say that I've had it or not had it, we're still going through that early testing phase. Majority of those in the UK have not been tested, and I think you're kind of I think we're moving into an area which I'm not kind of qualified to answer or to comment on, but the idea of trying to create this idea, this kind of I've had the disease, I'm okay now, so I don't need to be quarantined. I can fly through the airport. I can fly through literally to wherever I need to go without being challenged. Yeah, that'd be great. But the reality of how that can be done and how you differentiate is a bit more challenging.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody's asking a question. If you're able to answer it, what's the current situation regarding quarantine between the UK, Dublin, and Northern Ireland? Now, initially, Ireland was going to be excluded from the quarantine measures. Is that still the case?
It is, yeah. They're common travel area, so they are excluded when you fly inbound into the UK.
Okay. So you can travel there. You don't have to worry about any kind of quarantine there. Okay. Yep. Okay. So on this point, Kate Kenwood says, I believe there's already a corridor between Ireland and the Isle of Man to the UK. Has anybody seen an increase in traffic, especially between the UK and Ireland? And could this be used as an example of how things could pan out with other destinations? Chris, I don't know if you might have seen that if airports are reporting an increase in traffic.
No, because travel is down across the board because you're traveling to destinations that are in lockdown. There's a lot less reason to travel, whether it's business or leisure. So it's down everywhere. Yeah, the restrictions on aviation itself are a part of the picture. What we're conscious of, what we're looking to, is the next couple of months, principally in Europe, but also around the world, where places start to open up again. And it's then what we want to avoid is an unnecessary bottleneck restriction within aviation that prevents people either taking advantage of Britain being open for business or being able to go to Spain or wherever for their holidays. We haven't had that up till today so much. So I think travel is down everywhere. So the aviation restrictions aren't the problem today. It's the problem in 2-3 weeks that we're concerned about.
And what could this mean for holiday pricing? Or for airline ticket pricing, Colin? Do you foresee a rise in airline tickets, or will they stay quite low because they're trying to entice people still to travel?
I think initially you're probably starting to see a lot of very good fares coming into the market. Initially, there needs to be a kind of stimulation of demand, right? And so a lot of the focus from airlines has been about providing clarity on what we're doing on board to mitigate the risk of transmission. And I think that's what a lot of airlines and most airlines are doing. I think when they're now starting to move into the phase 2, which is actually, these are the frequencies, this is the schedules that we're offering, trying to stimulate future demand, whether that be for the summer, for winter, or for summer next year. And so I think you will see initially certainly very good offers and fares in the market to stimulate that initial demand. Of course, there's all the mitigation costs that need to be implemented by not just airlines, but by every supplier and every industry and company. And so, depending how stringent those need to be moving forward, there's certainly that to be aware of. But I think initially, certainly pushing for this year and the beginning of next year, I think there's going to be some fantastic offers available. I know that as an airline, we're looking at starting our promotions to Latin America and Europe at some fantastic rates as well. So it's that balance between reassuring the customer and the consumer that it's safe to travel and that they can travel, like FCO regulation or advice, etc. And then looking at what the options are available. But I think there's going to be some fantastic offers available.
Well, which will be good news for stimulating demand, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just last, we've got a question from Declan Hughes, a question for you again, Colin, saying it was reported today, and I haven't seen the story, but this person says that a Ryanair passenger was refused boarding a flight from Dublin to London for not wearing a face mask. Passengers are somewhat confused in relation to various airline policies with regards to masks. What's your opinion? Should airlines have them to hand in to passengers at the check-in desk or the gate, or should a passenger arrive at the airport already and they should already have one on them?
I think you talked earlier about the new look of travel, and I think the new look of travel will be that face masks will just be mandatory. You know, that for you to fly, certainly in the short term, you'll need to be wearing a face mask. And so I think, you know, our advice is, or we've certainly implemented a mask, so you have to have a mask on to fly. And we're encouraged, you know, there is a risk of a passenger being refused entry if they don't have a mask. Now, there'll be masks available at retail stores at the airport. I don't necessarily think that's an airline's responsibility to provide that mask, but just as you bring your luggage to the airport, I think it will be as commonplace to make sure you travel with a mask as well, to know that you will be able to access and be allowed boarding. So to answer that question, I think, yes, it will be mandatory, certainly in the short term, to wear a mask, and I think it's absolutely reasonable to say that the passenger should bring that with them.
Well, Chris, I'm wondering if when we go to the airports now, we get given those free plastic bags, didn't we? And for a while at certain airports, you still had to buy them. But will we see airports giving out masks, do you think, or passengers are going to have to pay for them?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it goes back more to what you're saying about a sort of new normal, because obviously everyone has to travel to get to the airport. So now, in some cases, they'll be doing that on the train or on a bus, in which case, frankly, I think we'll have already reached the point where it's mandatory on those as well. So they should already have a face mask, I would expect, before they're traveling. I think unless you're actually driving and parking yourself at the airport, you know, I think you're going to be going on some kind of, you know, transfer bus at some point before you've even got in the terminal building. So I think for most people, having a face mask will just become a normal part of life. So I think I'd agree with what was said. I think they'll be available at retail stores in the airport, but actually the majority of people will be bringing their own, because it's something a bit different to just a little plastic bag for your liquids.
And I've already seen some kind of fashion houses already designing masks and branding them. Maybe we'll see travel agents or tour operators putting their logos on them. Luke, do you think masks are now the new face of travel? Agents could be giving them out when they give them their luggage tags.
Well, I'll let them look at all the commercial opportunities around it. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, of course, that it does look as though certainly for the journey element, that is going to be necessary. And then, as was mentioned earlier, I think people are going to get used to wearing these on public transport and around anyway. So I think it's not going to be something that's, you know, as discomforting as it may have appeared a year ago if you'd said to people that you were going to need to wear face masks to travel. So I don't think it'll be as large a factor as perhaps may have seemed the case a while back.
Yeah. All right, listen, thank you very much, guys. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap this up now, but really appreciate you all giving up your time. So thank you very much for joining us today.